Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Criminal Mischief, the Art and Science of Crime Fiction YouTube channel. And I'm your host, DP Lyle, and I'm here with my co-host and partner in crime, Kathleen Antrim.
Lots of crime. Yeah, it's great to be here with you, Doug. And today we've got a really interesting guest. His name is Lieutenant Brandon Watkins. He has been on over 400 murder investigations, homicide, I should say, investigations, and he's got about 27 years in the field. And we are really excited to have you, Lieutenant Watkins. Would you prefer to be called that or Brandon?
Brandon works.
Okay, great. So it's great to have you on, and I'm really curious how you actually got into this line of work.
Well, when I got out of college, I went to work for a newspaper. I love the Fletch books, and I thought I was going to be the next Irwin Fletcher, and and it was not that world at all. And I was kind of bored doing it. My best friend was a police officer. Saw how much fun those guys were having and how much they enjoyed their job. So I thought I'll try to do this for a little bit, and maybe I can get a book out of it. And instead, I've got 27 years, and I can see the retirement at the end of the tunnel here.
Oh, wow. So then you went ahead and I'm assuming you had to go to police academy, etc.
Yeah, you applied, and back then it was really difficult to get onto the Tulsa Police Department. You would have 600-700 applicants for like 12 jobs, and you had to have a bachelor's degree to get on here. And I managed to hoodwink somebody because they picked me the first time I applied. Got into the academy. You do 6 months in the academy, and you do 6 months in field training with field training officers. And from there, I spent probably the next 5 years in patrol, and kind of decided maybe I wanted to be a supervisor. Started taking the tests, worked my way up to what's now is lieutenant. It used to be sergeants, but they just gave us a name change. So now I'm a lieutenant. But I've been a lieutenant now for probably 16, 17 years. And lieutenant, you start out in the field, started out working graveyards, and you work your way up from there. I went to I was an administrative captain. Just lieutenant for a little while, which was really not my bag at all. And I ended up going to the burglary unit in detective division. The detective division had always been kind of my goal. I wanted to get in there one way or another. Got into burglary, spent the next 3 years in burglary, and had a lot of success, kind of made a reputation for myself at burglary. We were doing some crazy stuff, and really turned it into a capering unit. We were catching burglars like mad, and kind of made my name there. And then the homicide lieutenant at the time retired, and there was a guy who was running the robbery unit named Dave Walker. Fans of the First 48 know him and love him, and Dave became the new homicide lieutenant or sergeant at the time, and then I got the robbery job. Smash cut to 7 years later, Dave retired out of homicide, and I became the new homicide lieutenant, and I've been here going on 6 years.
So how big is your team? Tulsa's a big city, so.
Yeah, we've got about, I want to say 400,000 people in Tulsa. We're actually kind of undersized for our unit is undersized for the size of town that we have. You talk to other similar sized cities, they've got 16, 17 investigators, and we have 10 investigators, essentially, is what it comes down to. I would not consider myself an investigator. I just run the unit. I get more credit for doing nothing. That's sort of that's a supervisor's gig.
So. Well, let me take you back a little bit. I remember, in medical school, we went through the first 2 years of classrooms, and then suddenly we become juniors and they turn you loose on the world, and you go out in the world for the first time, the hospital being the world, and start taking care of sick folks. And I remember all the angst and anxiety, and please, dear Lord, don't let me make a mistake. And, I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm out of my element and all that. Did you have similar things when you went out of the training and jumped into actual field work, even as a training agent?
Yeah, absolutely.
What was that like?
Man, you know, while you're in the academy, you get everything in theory. You're kind of wrapped in this bubble where they put you under a lot of stress, but it's not the same as the real thing. And, you know, then you go through training with training officers, and you're kind of dumped right out in the middle of it, but you always have that safety blanket of having the old guy or gal who's there, has been through it, who's kind of teaching you how to get through it all. That first day that you're out there by yourself, there's nobody to fall back on. It's you know, my goal was to find somebody and go to jail for some good charge. And I think I ended up doing that. I got a assault with a dangerous weapon person right as my shift was ending. And I could not have been prouder that I did this relatively easy case, you know, all by my lonesome. But you know, it is that way. You're just kind of tossed out there, and it's sink or swim after you've been through it. You've just got to kind of muddle your way through and figure it out.
When you were on patrol as a patrol officer, did you work in pairs, or were there times you were by yourself? How did that work there?
In Tulsa, you always start out by yourself. We don't ride around in pairs unless, you know, sometimes you will if your car's broken down, or, you know, I remember there was one night that I had 103-degree fever and I couldn't leave. So they stuck me in a car with another guy, and he did all the work while I lay in his car dying, or feeling like I was dying. But yeah, you're by yourself, and that's one of the things that I loved about patrol is that, you know, you're the tip of the spear. Everything that happens, you're the first one there. You know, here a couple of years ago, we had the St. Francis shooting where we had a shooter that walked into a hospital and just started shooting people. And we worked it, but you see these patrol officers, these guys. There was a couple of them that got there at the hospital like within a minute or so, and they're running into that building, you know, grabbing their rifles, and that was always something that kind of appealed to me, being that first person into a dangerous scene. You learn a lot about yourself, and it's kind of thrilling, and it's also, you know, it's scary. So
What situations did you find were the scariest? I mean, when you were out there on patrol at night, was it like a nighttime traffic stop, or was it like a domestic issue? What kind of things did it really ramp you up and say, you know, this could go south in a hurry?
Man, it's just everything can go south.
Yeah.
Like, you know, we were talking about the first day out. I think it was within my first week out. I had a call of a car that was stranded on the side of the road. It was assist a stranded motorist. Super easy call. I mean, you go there, you try to help people if they're in a dangerous area. You get them off that. You call them a tow truck. You keep the lights on. I mean, it's the simplest call as you could possibly make. And as I rolled up, there were two women who were standing at the front of the car, and there was a guy who took off running back to his car. And they said, "Man, I don't know what's up with him, but he's weird, and he scared us." And so I went up to talk to him. Next thing I know, I'm in a fist fight with a guy on the side of the road, you know, off the blandest, most boring call on earth. And you know, I think a passing motorist called in and said, "Hey, you've got a cop up here fighting with the guy," because I was too new. I didn't even know how to use my radio properly, and you know, you end up wrestling around and fighting with a guy up on the side of the road. And turns out he was a rapist who had just got out of prison and was being really, really creepy with them. But you never know what you're getting into. And when you're a patrol officer, the most banal, easy calls can turn into something that is, you know, you're just fighting for your life in a moment's notice.
So you definitely got to stay on your toes. My gosh. I mean, that's
yeah. There was never really any one type of call that kind of made you just kind of always assumed after a little while you get wrapped up every call that you go into, because the simplest call can go south really, really fast.
Wow. So one of the things I think I find really interesting is how do you select an investigator for a certain kind of homicide or investigation? I mean, I have always thought that, you know, if you're on duty that time, you just get the call, but it sounds like they're actually selected based on experience or what have you. You know, explain that to us.
Well, we select people to come into the unit based off their experience. You know, you're not going to come in to the homicide unit straight off patrol. That's all you've ever done is patrol. We want somebody who's got quite a bit of investigative experience, because they need to, at a minimum, need to know how to write warrants. They need to know when to write warrants. They need to know, the case law, state law, um, federal law in our case, because we're now, Tulsa's in the middle of the biggest reservation in America. So we have to deal with the feds an awful lot. But for an actual each murder, you're just on a rotation basis here in Tulsa. If you're up, you get called. There are some guys who would love to pick and choose what murders they get, but unfortunately, they're just at the whim of the murder gods.
The murder gods.
Well, you investigated, I think, over 400 homicides.
I'm getting close to
Yeah.
400. I can't
Are there
remember
some that
exactly
really stick with you and that you just like, whoa, you can't shake them?
Oh yeah. There was one I actually broke down bawling on television while I was talking to it. I've gone to enough therapy now. I think I've dealt with it, but I don't like the domestic ones. Domestic ones bother me. It's hard to deal with the idea that somebody would murder brutally somebody supposedly that they love, and it's a rough one. I mean, we had a particularly ugly one this weekend. Those bother me a lot. So, but again, like I said, you go to therapy, you take up yoga, and if all else fails, I'll go fly fishing.
Excellent. Well, I know you've been on one of my favorite programs of all, the First 48, and because it's just so well done and so realistic and everything. Does having those guys, what's the mechanics of how all that works when you're doing something with a camera crew around, and does that affect how you do things in any way?
It really doesn't. After a little while, when I first came into the unit, the First 48 was already here and had been here for quite a while. And so I was kind of aware, I want to make sure they got my good side, so I'll be pretty on television and everything. But after a little while, you stop noticing them. They're just sort of in the background, and you're not even aware that they're there. And then all of a sudden they're at your side going, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And so you just stand, you tell them what your opinion is of what you're seeing. But the mechanics of it are, anytime we have a murder, it comes to me first. I'll get the call at like 3 a.m. Then I will send out whoever's up. The primary detective will go, and then I'll call the backup detective, and they'll go. It's rotation on both of them, and then we have a supervisor rotation. I have 2 sergeants who also work with us, and they take every other one, and I'll take every other one, and I'll call them if they're up, and then I try to go back to sleep, which rarely works out. But if I'm up, then the next call that I actually make will be to the First 48. I will text them and let them know, hey, we've got a murder. I won't call them if it's an easy one. If it's like a murder suicide, or suspect's already in custody, or we know who the suspect is before we even go out there. So, but if it looks like it's going to be a whodunit, we give them a call and they show up, and they're usually at the scene before we are. And now patrol officers are all used to them. Everybody kind of knows them. They've been here for so long. Those guys are almost part of our squad. We like them a lot.
That's pretty cool to have them there. And I mean, obviously they know not to touch things and etc. I'm sure they had to go through a lot of training.
Oh yeah, they completely stay out of the way. They don't get close. If they walk into a crime scene, it's all logged, but they will only follow the detective. They don't go in prior to anything that's being done. So yeah, they're really good about kind of staying out of the way and not getting in onto anything that might impact the investigation.
So obviously the name of the show is the First 48. So talk about how important that first 48 hours actually is and why it's so important.
Well, I've never been a believer that it has to be done in the first 48, or it gets harder, because it does. I mean, there are things that you can know who it was in the first minute that you walked in there, but then you're looking for them for 6 months after that. But the first 48 hours are really important in that, if possible, you want to catch that suspect in that first 48 hours, because they don't really have time to solidify their alibi. They don't have time to, call up their girlfriend and say, here's what I want you to tell the police. It's and the quicker you work, it just seems like the stronger the case is. Whenever they spread out over time, and some of our investigations have been going on for years. We have one that we should be filing on this week that's about 8 years old, I want to say 8 or 9 years old.
Oh, wow.
And it's you never stop working them. The time though does make it more difficult. That bar goes up and up and up for filing. The district attorneys don't want to file a case that is off of one person pointing at a guy and saying that's the guy that did it, and it was 12 years ago. They want more evidence than just that, and it gets harder to find that extra evidence the longer it goes. Videotape disappears, text messages disappear, all kinds of evidence just sort of disappear over time. So that first 48 hours is important. It's not the be all end all, but it's definitely something that you like to get it done as quickly as possible, because it just seems to make your case stronger.
Oh my gosh. So this case that you have now that is just going to be filed, I think you just said after 8 years, what was the linchpin? How did it end up coming together now?
We have a cold case guy who has been going through old cold cases and seeing what blood evidence there might be, so that we can have it checked for DNA. The science is always getting better. We're doing stuff now that we weren't doing stuff 2 years ago, because the science has just gotten better. So he worked with the investigator that had the case. They had some blood retested, and it came back to the person who was the suspect from the very beginning. So it always had a good suspect. It just needed that extra nudge to push it over so that we could make an arrest.
And there's no statute of limitations for murder, correct?
Correct. Yeah, murders. It's open forever. I mean, if we've got our oldest cold case, I want to say it's from 1968. If we found something and the suspect was still alive we could file on that old murder. They're open forever until you have some kind of resolution, which is part of the stress that goes on a homicide detective, is that we're kind of judged by our failures. Nobody ever asked me when I was in burglary, what about those 15,000 burglaries that weren't solved? Everybody wants to know about the murders that weren't solved, and you feel this constant pressure of trying to get those things solved, and it leads a lot of guys to burnout. And it's just this never ending, I don't know, train that's running you over and over and over until you find a way to make it stop.
Oh,
How does the dynamic go between, say, you and the DA that may or may not file the charges and I'm sure this comes up a lot where not necessarily one's right and one's wrong. You feel that you got enough to go forward with, but they obviously, looking at it through a different lens, say, we're not quite there and I don't want to take this into court and lose it. That conflict, how are those usually resolved? And I'm sure you have a pretty good working relationship with them, but there's got to be points of fishing.
Yeah, I will say Tulsa, we're very, very fortunate. Our DAs work incredibly well with us. Our DA's office is aggressive. And at the flip side, we have the federal system, which the federal system, we joke, we say their motto is do nothing slowly. And they always want more. There's always a reason not to do something. There's always a reason it drives us nuts. But our DA's office has been fantastic about working with us. And when we don't have it, and they'll tell us we don't have it, they want more. We just got to go out there and find it. We got to go out there and push it until we're there. The flip side of that also is that the DA's office knows that we won't just stop investigating something just because we've made an arrest. that's one of the things I think that a lot of people don't quite realize is everybody assumes you put handcuffs on the suspect and you've got this big win, everybody high fives and they go home and have a party. And the reality of it is these cases never end. You get the handcuffs on the guy and the work's really just starting. You have to follow up on every single little thing that comes along. You know, sometimes your suspect will reach out to somebody outside the jail to say, hey, go put some pressure on this witness, make sure he doesn't. So you've got to go deal with that. You've got to go, anybody who tries to come forward and be an alibi witness for your suspect, you have to go investigate that. If it comes out that alibi is good and you arrested the wrong guy, you're going to have to take that. You're going to have to, get the subsequent bad press that's going to come along with it, because it's part of the gig. But the DAs know that we will continue working them. We're not, even if the case could be a lot stronger, by the time it goes to court, it's going to be a heck of a lot stronger, because you just never stop working.
Oh my gosh. And usually how long does it take between an arrest and it actually going to court? I mean, isn't that quite a bit of time usually?
I will be here 6 years in August. Will be my 6th year here. And there is a guy who we arrested in the first week that I was in here, and it still has not gone to court. He hasn't had his trial yet. It's liable to be a death penalty one, so that's was why it takes so long. But yeah, these things they can either go really, really quick. We had a guy that we arrested last year on a murder who's already pled, and he's in, but usually you're looking at a couple of years before it actually goes to trial.
Now, do they sit in jail during that entire time, or can they be out on bail or what have you?
They started setting bonds for some murders. I mean, they're generally pretty high bonds, but technically, yes, they could bond out and they could be out, or most likely, though, they're sitting in jail the whole time.
Well, we hear a lot of, you see a lot in things about you guys need to get a warrant from the judge in the middle of the night. And I know that there's circumstances under which, you can do a warrantless search and you can do all that. I know what those things are, fires or evidence going to be destroyed or whatever. But if it's not one of those, what's the quickest they say you could get a warrant to go search somebody's car, to go search somebody's home, when you're pretty certain that the evidence is in there and that it is at risk, but maybe not from a fire burning the house down? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, we can get a warrant, an evidence warrant, pretty easy, pretty quick. For instance, this weekend we had 2 murders. Both of them happened after midnight. By the time we got the warrants written, it was around 2:33 in the morning. And you just call the on-call judge, wake them up, and we send it electronically, and they'll sign it. Used to, we'd have to drive over to their house and knock on the door till they woke up, and then have them sign it. And we can get an evidence warrant late at night. Now, there's a lot of rules regarding how late you can serve a search warrant, but when it's just evidence, you've just got like a body in an apartment, you can get those fairly quickly. We had an incident in January where a woman went missing, and we found her car on a Friday. The suspect in it was her husband, and he wouldn't let us in the car. So we knew we'd have to write a warrant for it. So we wrote the warrant on Saturday because we were following up leads, and then we were working with the family doing the search for the woman on Saturday. Ran the warrant first thing Sunday morning. We found her body inside the car. So, you can get the warrants fairly quickly, but depending on the circumstances, like with a car, you can keep that away from the public. You can keep that in a secure space where no one can get in there and can mess with the car. They're not going to mess with your evidence. That's a little less of a time crunch than like having a body in an apartment. You've got to get in there as quickly as you can. So we'll wake up a judge for that. We probably won't wake up a judge for a car that we could tow. Mm-hmm. But with that one, we weren't even sure. We couldn't see her inside the car, or we would have done it that day. It just is what it was. So
when you walk into a scene, I mean, obviously, you have to keep an open mind as to what may have happened. But is it pretty obvious? I mean,
yeah, I mean, you do, and you really do have to keep an open mind. It's one of the things that I love. You know, when I first came into the unit, I'd probably had a decade in detective division at that point, and you know, to me, things were just self-evident, and I'd have all these guys that have been around forever, and they're like, yeah, maybe. And then, you know, they're like, yeah, it's kind of what it looks like. Sure, kind of. And then, you know, an hour later, you have all new information, and you're going, oh, I'm glad we didn't arrest this dude, because it turns out he was, you know, he was safe. You do have to, there are times that you look at stuff and you go, I know 100% what happened. And 2 hours later, you're back at square one. You have no clue what really actually happened here. So
wow.
it's, you know, I'm not a big proponent of, you can look at a scene like Sherlock Holmes and go, you know, this mud only came from this house on this date, and, you know, with the rains and all that. It's more, I don't know. Murders are almost like a logic problem. You listen to what everybody says, and I think that's the strongest point of any investigator is their listening ability, and they pick up, you know, when a suspect suddenly talks about a victim in the past tense instead of talking about them in the current tense. You know, they've switched. They just made this one little error and they pick this stuff up, or the suspect starts changing a story just a tiny little bit in order to fit a fact that you just threw out there at them. It's being able to listen and pick that stuff up, which really is what makes what you have to do. Walking into a scene, you learn some facts when you walk into a scene, and you can look at stuff. But as far as figuring out who did it, it's almost like I said, a logic problem. You listen to them, and then you take everybody at face value, and then start exposing their lies.
So have you ever met somebody who was a terrific liar that was fooling a lot of people?
Oh, absolutely. It happens all the time. You get
really?
some guys in there that are, they get a story, man, they stick with it. I'll tell you a funny story is we were talking to a kid one time, and man, we all believed it. You know, the detectives that were sitting in there interviewing him, and we're all watching it on screens on the outside, and detectives come out, we huddle up, and we're like, yeah, man, I'm buying it. I'm not seeing it at all. And detective walked back in there and say, okay, we're going to let you go. And when he walked back in there, the kid goes, man, I don't know why I was trying to get this over on you all. I watched you all on the first 48. There's no way I can lie to you. Yeah, I did it. And it was like, okay.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, he was this close to just walking, because we would have figured it out eventually, I believe, but he was a really good liar, and had us all fooled.
Oh my gosh.
It takes more energy to make something up than it does to remember something. And I think that's part of the problems. You try to create a scenario and you forget so many parts of it. And that's why you guys catch them. And I think catch them in the lies, and then they start tweaking their story. Like you said, I like that.
Right. Well, that's the deal. You make up a lie, and it feels pretty good, and it sounds pretty good, and you think that it covers everything. And then, but because we've been to the scene, because we started pulling video, because we've looked at other evidence, we can toss out a little fact that doesn't fit in with their thing. And then you see the wheels turning, and then they try to make that new fact fit the story that they've already told. So they start changing little bits of the story. That's when you know you got them.
Wow.
You ever play good cop, bad cop, or is that kind of passe and stupid?
It's done every now and then, but
Yeah.
to be honest with you, the best success that we see, like Jason White is a guy that everybody, people who watch the first 48 love Jason. Jason never plays bad cop. He's not interested in it, doesn't really even want bad cop played whenever he's doing a thing, because he wants to just sit, create rapport, and listen to the people. And he's got a tremendous amount of success with that. Mark Kennedy is one of our guys who's, been around forever. He loves to play bad cop every now and then. And, next thing you know, he's holding hands with the suspect and hugging them. And I mean, I think, if you're playing the good cop, bad cop, you kind of have to be able to switch on a dime. We don't use it a whole lot in Tulsa. It's more of a sit down and listen to them, and then start deconstructing their story.
Well, being an investigator in this arena, it really spins around people skills and communicating with people. Does that just come from experience, or do you actually have classes and and seminars and stuff where you learn a little bit more about how to interface with people and get the truth out of them?
And that comes from a lot of it is being in detective division. When I was out in the field, you're basically what we call one up on everybody. I'm the boss here. You're going to listen to me. You're going to do what I tell you to do, because when you're in the field, it's much more raw. It's sometimes you just have to be that authoritative voice to get people to sit down and kind of make things a little bit safer. In detective division, though, when you start talking to suspects and you're talking to victims, sometimes you're one down, sometimes you're one up, one time you're even with them. You're constantly shifting to fit, and you learn how to read somebody pretty well, which is why we want somebody who's got a lot of experience. You want somebody who sits and listens to an interview and knows when it's time to, call BS and, make it authoritative. I don't, you're lying to me. I'm tired of you lying to me. It's time you start, coming with the truth. And then you have to have those moments where you're listening to him and go, yeah, I can imagine this guy really made you angry. The people who are really good at that are the people who work crimes against children. They talk to some of the most evil human beings on earth, and they, have to talk to them in such a way as like, I get it. I understand why you think this way. And in the meantime, these guys are making your skin crawl. So it's
Wow.
that's why we like detective division. You really learn how to talk to people and how to get what you need out of, because ultimately, realistically, people talking to us, we're talking them into telling us stuff that's going to dramatically impact their life. It's probably going to put them in prison forever. And just creating rapport and being nice and talking somebody into that it's an art.
Do you ever worry about putting somebody away who didn't do the crime?
Oh, that's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. And that's one of the things that you see that happen when detectives, confirmation bias is a big part of the problem. That you see that, we had a detective here a few years ago who got it in their head, this is what happened, and no amount of evidence could dissuade this detective from it.
Mm.
And it took the whole squad just staying on top and keeping things going, and ultimately didn't work out, and that detective had to move on. Very hardworking, good person. It's just that wanted to show us how good of a detective and they could be, and it's you don't want to have that confirmation bias creep in where you go, I know what happened, and I'm going to make the facts fit what happened. I'm going to narrate the facts in a way that it proves my hypothesis. And you see a lot of smaller area detectives kind of doing that, but you also see them, they're willing to just take the word of one witness or one supposed eyewitness. We won't do that in Tulsa. We don't have, I was there and I saw him do it. Okay, that's a good start. We've got a good suspect. We're going from there. Now we're going to start looking for corroborating evidence. Once you start getting some corroborative evidence, and sometimes you don't get it, and you start realizing that the person who told you that had, their own motivations for doing it. But it takes a lot of evidence before we make the jump to arrest, because I don't want to be the object of a Netflix documentary that look what a terrible job these detectives did. Like, oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. Can't even imagine.
Well, a lot of our viewers are obviously writers, because this is part of Outliers Writing University, and I won't let everybody know that you're actually doing one of our intensive sessions we called, I think it's May 22nd. That's going to be a Q&A, and Brandon's going to be there to answer your story questions. And I think nowhere more than crime fiction is it required that the writer get things right. And so that's all obviously on our website and all that, and be sure and sign up for that and show and get all your questions answered about police procedure. But let me, in that vein, let me ask you, what is the one thing that you see that the most important thing that storytellers, whether if it's written or visual, get wrong that makes you just say, "Oh, come on"?
A lot of it is in attitudes. And I know there are tropes that people use in order to push the story along or make their hero. The whole loose cannon thing drives me nuts. Lethal Weapon. I'll use a movie. He's a loose cannon that plays by his own rules. Making an arrest or getting the bad guy is important. Getting it through trial is more important. So you've got to play within the rules, and it's harder to do. It's much harder. It would be so nice when we know who did it. We don't need a warrant. We're just going to go take them out, and that would be great. But realistically, anytime you're doing an investigation, you've got one eye on the investigation and one eye on the prosecution. So you want to make sure everything gets documented, and maybe that's a little bit too tedious for most books, but I think one guy who always got it right, in my opinion, and I'm a huge Elmore Leonard fan. You read Elmore Leonard's books, and it's very clear he knew police officers. He knew kind of the workaday, Sam and Ralph, clock in, clock out, sort of, blue collar atmosphere that's going around them. And, guys weren't, angry and running off at to get into a gunfight on the drop of a hat. They're trying to follow the procedure because it's not enough to put handcuffs on. You have to be able to get that guy through trial. And if you can't do that, then all your work is for nothing.
So Dirty Harry's not necessarily the way to do it.
No, Dirty, maybe back in the 70s, but not today. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And often they show different shows, what have you, might show conflict between the feds and the local police forces. And I'm sure that a lot of that, I sometimes hard to believe that really exists.
That really does exist.
Oh, does it?
Yeah, it really.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Personalities and
we have a pretty good working relationship with the FBI here. Tulsa a few years back became a large reservation. And that means that anytime you had a Native American suspect, it becomes a federal crime at that point. And we just live in dread of having of having to do a federal investigation because there's no sense of urgency in our mind. Now, the FBI works extremely well with us here in town. It's a different system, and it's a much more difficult system to work in than the state system. And then they'll be the first to admit that. I had one of the U.S. attorneys tell me once, they used to be like snipers. They would set up and they could pick their target and they could take what they want. And now, they're just getting overrun with stuff. And that's they're in a learning period too. Whereas we have grown spoiled with our district attorney, we always work with them, obviously, and they know what we do. We know what they do, and there's no surprises. But there is some friction with the feds.
So. Interesting. Okay, well, that's good for writers to know that.
Yes, it is.
And other agencies too. I mean, you show up. Most of the, we had Tulsa County is also another agency here in town that jurisdictional issues do pop up on occasion, and but it's a little bit different. I mean, a lot of times you see, no, this is my case. I'm taking it over. You can't have it. And mostly it's, no, this is yours. This is yours. You all take it. We don't want it. But, there's not that much friction that goes in that, but there's friction between agencies a lot. So.
Well, Lieutenant Brandon Watkins, has been fantastic to have you. You are a great interview. I cannot wait to have you back on. Really enjoy this, and want to remind our viewers again that he will be teaching a class on May 22nd through Outliers Writing University. You can sign up at outlierswritinguniversity.com and take Lieutenant Watkins' class. If you're writing crime fiction, I highly recommend it. You need to know this stuff. And I also want to ask our viewers to please click the thumbs up. It helps us with the algorithms and gets the interviews out. And please subscribe, and we can bring you more interviews like this. And thank you again, Lieutenant. It's been great to have you.
Had a lot of fun.
Brandon, thanks so much, and we're really looking forward to your class in May. I will be there
Oh,
Yeah, so will
to
I.
learn, just like all the other writers. So we appreciate it, and thank you so much for doing this.
not a problem. You guys take care.
All right.
Thank you.
Until next time, this has been Criminal Mischief, the art and science of crime fiction, and this is our YouTube channel. And we'll be back with more interviews and more programs later. Thanks.